Appreciate everybody being here this evening. Appreciate you coming back for session two. It's looking to be just as good as the first session. So we appreciate you coming back, being with us. If you were not able to attend the first one, it is recorded. It's on the YouTube channel, the McLean County OSU Extension channel. You can go there and watch that one. Tonight, our speakers are Dr. Alex Rocatelli, and he is our forage specialist on campus there at Oklahoma State University there in Stillwater. And then Casey Russell, dear friend of mine and co-worker from over in Cole County, and he will be discussing hay forage testing and the benefits of that. And then Dr. Rocatelli will go into some warm season forages and their management as well. So we appreciate both of these guys being with us, and we appreciate you guys being here tonight. Without anything further, we're going to turn the floor over to Casey and let him begin with his presentation on hay and forage testing. Thanks, Casey.
All right. Thank you, Justin. Okay, tonight we're going to be discussing forage testing and what you get from that test, how to properly take a test, and then the benefits of it and what we're going to do with it when we get it back. Do we need to test our hay? That's the question that everybody seems to always ask me. Is it worth testing? And the short answer to that is yes. It's always worthwhile to test your hay, whether you raise it or buying it. Either way, quality is always changing in hay. You may have, if you're baling it yourself, you may have baled a field your whole life, but quality is always changing from year to year and even from season to season. So we need to test our hay to see where we're at. So why would we want to test hay? Number one reason is to figure out the quality, especially for buying it. Visually looking at hay and telling the quality of it is very difficult. If we're selling hay, if we're just a hay producer, we can maybe have or show better quality than somebody else and have value in that. So if you're even selling hay, it's a good reason to test it. Probably the most important reason to test hay is because somebody at some point, whether it's you or somebody that you're selling it to, is going to feed that hay. And for us to properly add up the nutrition that the livestock needs, we need to know what that hay is providing first, so we don't have to haul all of the feed to them, or maybe we can just use less supplementation than we normally do, or maybe we need to do more so we don't lose body condition scores. So ultimately, I think the testing of hay will end up helping the feed bucket in the end. Like I said before, the quality of forage cannot be determined visually. I have some producers that I test hay for yearly, and one of them this year, when I talked to him on the phone, I said, man, that's probably some of the best looking hay that you've ever produced visually. But in the end, it was not the best he had ever produced quality wise. So visually looking at hay, we can't always tell what the quality of it is. And forage quality is influenced by so many factors. Did it lay in the field an extra day? Did it get a little shower on it and we had to rake it a couple of times? Was it a couple of weeks older than it needed to be? That's all those questions that we can't answer if we weren't there. And even if we were there, we don't know how it affected our quality. So there's so many different factors that can cause quality to be higher or lower. Fertility, time it's when it was mowed, how long it was there after it was mowed, before it was baled, and so many different factors. Here's one short slide of why the quality is so important to us from a cow standpoint, whether you produce it or buy it. What we consider a high quality hay, 10% protein or better probably, it will meet the needs of a lactating cow if we feed it and have enough hay on hand of that type of hay to feed her free choice. So if we have enough hay to go through our feeding season and it's test 10% or better, we don't have to haul any feed to a lactating cow. And that's there's some savings in that, I think, when you sit down and put a pencil to it. Even a good quality hay of around 7.5% will meet a dry cow's needs. So if they're separated off, or you have a timed calving season that will allow you to just feed this hay to those dry cows, then we don't have to haul feed to them. And we know when we haul feed to anything that it gets expensive. Hay is expensive, don't get me wrong, but it's usually cheaper if the quality is good enough than it is feed. High quality is more digestible. These animals were made to live on forage, and when they consume that forage to meet their nutrition requirements, it's better for them. We're not changing their rumens around when we start hauling starchy feeds to them and things like that, and they will, when they are on a complete hay diet, when standing forage is low, the cattle will come through it. Usually a little better just because they're made to digest forage and turn it into energy for themselves. And like I mentioned, we may or may not have to haul supplements to them depending on the quality of our hay. Okay, so now we've decided that we need to test our hay. So we're going to look at just the equipment that we're going to need on farm to get that process done. This one right here is a workhorse. A lot of extension offices still have these. I have one that I've converted to take the bit and brace off of and put a drill on, but it's still a lot of work. You drill this into your hay, and then you have to take the tube off, dump it in a bucket, stick it back on there, and repeat that process until you get enough to fill up a bag. And it is time consuming. The one that I really like is manufactured in Stillwater. This is just simply a piece of PVC pipe with a stainless rod that's sharpened on the end. And here shortly we'll demonstrate how this is used, but you just push it in, and then you just keep pushing it in each bale until that pipe gets full. And when that pipe's full, is generally enough for a full forage bag to complete your sample. So once you've collected your sample, I don't want to reiterate, using a probe is paramount. You don't want to just grab sample hay out of bales, because it is not going to give you an accurate reading. It is only going to give you a visual reading of where you grab that hay out of that bale. It's like grabbing just one handful from a windrow. That's not going to be very accurate for you. So if you don't have a probe or don't have the desire to get one, most of our offices have one that we will loan you. And a gallon Ziploc bag is usually about the size you need to hold the sample. We can put those in forage bags here in our office. If somebody borrows our probe from our office, we send them with a forage bag, and then you don't have to do anything extra except just bring them back to the office and we'll get them sent off. If you have more than one sample, I would suggest that you mark those bags somehow where you know where they came from, so when the samples come back, we can discuss the variety of the results. Okay, we're going to watch a short video of Nathan Anderson, the agent in Payne County, on how to use this probe.
This is just one version of various kinds of hay samplers that are out there on the market. This is the tube shade made out of simple PVC pipe, shoving this front rod into the bale. That way you're getting various parts of the field, and if we go at angles, we're hitting all different forages from different locations across the field.
How are we getting in here? I mean, you're saying basically as we go in, you're getting in different parts of the field, right?
Right. Well, obviously this bale's rolled up this way. If we start with the hay sampler, and some people come in from the side or through here, at least we go through at an angle, we're getting forages from all over the field. If I went straight in this away,
You're getting it from one place.
I'm getting it from one location in the field.
Right.
I want a test that is going to test the entire crop and best represent the entire crop.
Very good.
So if I go at an angle, I'm getting various layers from various plants from various parts of the field. And I don't just pull the sample from one hay bale, I will pull it from many bales that are cut from that field.
And from different parts of the stack here, obviously, so they're spread out as well.
There's going to be spread out from and have better representation across the field.
Okay. Now with this kind of sampler, how do we get in there, right? Is it just
Just kind of
pure force? Or?
pure force, just shoving that bale in,
Okay.
that spike. Then you got a ramrod and you push it back into this holding tube. These bales hadn't been rolled up all that long. If I had a short tube on here and I waited till February to test this, that outer hay would be damaged.
Right.
It would have some loss of quality. But, you know, you want a representation of the
To get further in and get
further
a better
in
idea
and
of
get
what's
the
in
quality forage that's in there.
there. Right. All right, so let's take a look at what we've got here.
We've got all plant parts that's going to be consumed by the cow.
So a little bit of everything that's in there.
Stalk, leaves, seed heads that might be in this or other
Okay.
forage types.
Now, how do we get this actually to the lab from here?
We'll bag this up here in our county. We have to put our county codes on it.
Right.
It is sent by the county extension educator.
Okay.
The lab does its work and sends a report back to us.
Right. Now, the bag itself, there is a special bag to use, but if producers doesn't have those, do they get them from y'all or what do they do?
They can get them from us, but you can bring it in your own bag. A gallon-sized bag, Ziploc bag, is a really good volume to
Okay.
bring in when you're getting a good quality hay
Just good
test.
stuff full of that.
That's right.
Okay. All right. We appreciate your time today, and we'll take that sample in and take a look at it.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so that was a quick overview of how to use the hay probe. If you'd had one that uses the brace or a drill, you would basically go in from the side the same way, take the tube off, put it in a bucket or a bag, and then go to the next bale. So getting a proper sample. I recommend 12 to 20 samples. That's depending on the hay and how coarse or fine it is. That's how many it typically takes to fill that tube up and to fill your forage bag up. If we're getting it from a field, I like to divide it into quarters in the example on the right-hand side of your screen. And typically I like to get 3 to 5 bales per quarter. If they're still laying in the field like that, I just tell people to just randomly go through there and pick a bale. Don't exclude the bales that go, well, I baled a berry patch up right there or something. You need to sample it too, because we're getting a shotgun look at that forage base of all of that hay. We're not going to feed to each individual bale, so we need to know the highs and the lows of our forage quality in that field so we can get a good read on how we need to supplement these cattle if we do. Now, if we're already stacked or we're buying hay from a producer that's in rows, I suggest 3 to 5 bales per row. And we need to kind of know if a producer says all these bales that you're buying came from the same field, that's okay. If we're getting multiple fields, we may need to increase that number to get a better sample. As Nathan showed you, always sample the cross section of a bale, whether it's a round bale or big or little squares. We want to go in from what I call the flat end of a square bale. The end that is coming out of the machine as it's being baled, that's the end. And we want to go through all the layers of those to sample them. If we're sampling big squares, typically it's okay to get a sample from each end of those before you move on. That way you're getting a lot more broader spectrum of that hay, as short as that probe is. If we just get it from one end of a large square, we're not getting quite as good a sample as we are on a round bale. Like I said, different fields, different producers, or different forage types need to be sampled differently. That way we can get a good read and proper sample and get some good information. We want to have the best information we can at the end of the day to help further you with your sample. Use your sample when you get it done. We just don't want you to get your sample and then here it is and go, oh great, I got my sample, and then not go any further. We want to further your sample and get the best we can out of it. And that starts with a proper sample and a quality sample. So what's the next step? We have our sample. What do we do next? First, you want to bring it to your local extension office, and typically your ag agent or your secretary will log that in for you. If you have multiple samples, ID those on the bag to a location that means something to you. The North Place, the East Place, Mom's Place, whatever that means something to you, and we will record those locations. So when you sit down to get your samples, you'll know what hay we're talking about. But if you have to come back and have it retested or something, just know that those locations won't mean anything to us, and we'll have to use your lab ID to get that started over. And then we want to select what test we would like to have, and we'll discuss the different types of tests here in a minute. But basically, the main test that we'll be talking about is protein only, a basic plus RFV, and then one that we run quite a bit on some other forages that have nitrate problems is just a nitrate. And then pay and wait. That's all you have to do. You have to pay for the samples when we ship them out at the time of shipment, typically. And depending on the season and the time of year, right now soil samples are heavy. So forage samples go through pretty quick, but soil samples are kind of backed up. And in the fall, that's kind of the flip. Forage samples are high and soil samples are low. But typically, 5 to 10 business days, we can get you a sample back. And if it's something that's really pressing, we can sometimes call up there and tell Barbara that her hair looks pretty today and maybe get it done a little easier. But what you have to understand is it takes time once it gets on campus. I'm going to pull the cost up here, but I'm going to tell you on this slide also kind of the process and why it takes some time. Our first sample that you can get is a nitrate toxicity. If you have something that you fear is in high nitrate, that costs $6 just for the nitrate test, and we can get that turned around pretty quick because people are trying to make a management decision usually on nitrates, what they need to do with it. Most of the nitrate tests are done with something standing in the field, and that way you can make a decision on what you need to do pretty quick. But sometimes we get nitrate samples in on corn stalks or sorghum or something like that that's already rolled up, and we need to know what it is. The very basic is protein and moisture. I typically do not recommend this one to my producers because it just doesn't give us enough information to dive in to where we need to be to get nutritional facts. But if you just need protein only, sometimes we do protein only when we're double checking that if we think protein's off on a sample or something, we may do a protein only, or if we're trying to verify protein in a mix of feed that somebody's buying. It's usually when we do protein only. But if you're doing a forage sample, I recommend going to the next level, which is the basic analysis. And it gets you your protein and moisture, but it also gives you ADF and TDN, which is calculated from ADF. And that's where we can really give you some information on how to feed your animals. ADF is basically just a measurement of components that are not very digestible by livestock, including cellulose and lignin are the top two that we're really looking at, but there's other things. And ADF, if you're just comparing samples, you can kind of take an ADF number and compare it with, say you're buying hay, 3 producers give you their samples. As ADF increases, rule of thumb is that digestibility decreases. And so you can kind of help sort. It's kind of like, I guess it's EPDs for hay, if you want to think of it that way. As that increases, digestibility decreases, and we want something that is highly digestible. So that's a number that we can use to compare also with our protein. And then the final sample, if we really want to dive in, we can run this. I usually don't recommend this sample for grass haze. The basic analysis usually gets us everything we need to know for a good grass haze sample. But if you're sampling alfalfa or something like this, the basic plus RFV, which is relative feed value. In short terms, it's an estimate of digestibility on a dry matter basis, kind of a fill factor. How much of this cow can eat in a certain amount of time number, I guess, if you will. And it's used extensively in alfalfa, and it is not very cross-referenceable between alfalfa and grass. I get that a lot of times. People, I want RFV. Well, you're testing Bermuda grass. Well, I want to compare it to my alfalfa. Well, that's not how it works. It's to give people that use alfalfa extensively, dairies and people that are using it daily in a feeding operation, to compare different alfalfas and to know how the cattle will utilize that alfalfa is what that are relative feed value is used for. So if you're just sampling grass hay, it's not real relevant to you. I don't test a lot of alfalfa. I had to ask Justin for one that had a RFV on it even for my slideshow, and it's $20. So the $14 test is basically the best test for people that are trying to feed cows with grass hay. So while we're here, that sample will get mailed in the mail by UPS to campus. When it arrives there, they log it in with a barcode that we've applied to your bag. It puts all your information into the computer, and then it goes into it gets weighed, and it gets put in a dryer for 24 hours. And then it comes out and it gets weighed again, and that's where your moisture content gets calculated. From there, it is ground into a fine powder, and its first stop is at a Leco machine, and they take a half of what would be looks like a large pill capsule. And they put a calculated amount of your forage in a dial, and this thing drops it in the machine, and it combusts, and then it calculates your protein from there. If you are getting the basic plus, and we need ADF, then a portion of that sample gets put into a bag, and this bag is porous, and then it gets dried down even further, and then it is put into a machine that's filled with a water and acid concentrate, and this machine mimics the inside of a rumen, basically, for simple terms. And then those bags are dried again, and then we see how much we have lost. So all that takes, I mean, you're talking 3 to 4 days, depending on sample load there. So that's why it takes a few days to get these back. It's not an instant process. And some people don't understand that and want to know why their samples aren't ready. It just takes time. So here is the first sample. If you decided just to get a protein sample, this is what you would receive back from us. It would have your name up here, the location you provided us. It would give you the dry matter, which what's left over is moisture. And it will give your protein on a dry matter basis, which is just what it says. With all the moisture removed, that's how much protein is there. And then as fed, that's basically your protein with the water added back in it. So your moisture will be diluting it a little bit. Now this is the meat and potatoes test that I really like if we're trying to calculate ration or determine how we're going to use this hay in a feeding program. It still has everything of the basic program, but you can see that this ADF number here that I was talking about, and then your TDN. This is the one we're really looking for when we're trying to calculate rations for you. And they both come on a dry matter basis and an as-fed basis also. Kind of gives you some lactation information here, some megacals per pound for maintenance, lactation, and gain, if we really want to dive in more into a creation of a ration. And then here's the basic plus RFV. Same as the last ADF. Then we throw NDF in here also on the relative feed value test. And NDF basically tells us about the plant structure and the specifics of the cell walls. This is typically the low quality part of the hay. And we're wanting to know how much of that hay is the low quality undigestible, what we would consider low calorie filler, basically. And what that means is as that NDF percentage increases, that is kind of typically a rule of thumb indicator of maturity of that forage. So if we're looking at two Bermuda grass samples and the protein is about the same and the moisture is about the same, but NDF's a lot higher on one, that typically tells us that Bermuda grass was a lot more mature when it was baled. And it's going to have a lot more of those plant structures that make those plants bigger and structurally stronger, and those are not as digestible. And we consider that some low quality components to your forage sometimes. And then all of this information gets put into a long equation to spit out your relative feed value. It is not a true crossover, but it kind of put it in your mind as like an index of how you take a lot of things and calculate it in there, and where you can use it to compare like alfalfas across the board. And here's just a example of a test that has nitrate. I wanted to show you that had nitrate added on there. And this number is represented in parts per million, 2981. This is a basic test with nitrate added to it, those are the basic tests that you typically see a lot of times. So your test is complete and we have it back in our hands. What will you receive? If you tell me that in my office that you just want to know how good it is and how it's going to affect your cows, and I have my feed and this is what I'm going to feed and I'm not going to change that, I just want to know how to utilize it, this is what you'll get. We put your information in at the top, and then this is an Excel file, and it spits out some very common basic feeds for some very rule of thumb common cattle types. As you can see, this top one here is for a 1,200 pound mature cow who's dry in her last third of gestation. And we have all kinds of supplement options here, from commodities to sack feed to things like that. But what we see over here in the upper right hand corner is 2 black zeros. And that is telling us that we are meeting that dry cow's requirements with that hay. So you can pull that out and go, if this is my cow class and I feel confident that this is my cow class, I'm not going to have to feed anything but hay to her this year. And then we drop down, we're going to give you a 1,200 pound mature cow that is just calved, and she's in early lactation. And once again, we have all the same feed types. So you could go down, we're going to look over here in the right-hand corner first and see that she's about a half a pound short on protein, and she's about 2 3/4 pounds short on TDN a day. So we know that we're going to have to supplement her. So we can just go down through this smorgasbord of types of feed and go, oh, well, I can get 38's pretty easy. 38's are easy for me to get. How much of those do I need to feed? Well, you need to be feeding 3.6 pounds of those a day. Okay, well, that's what we'll do. Or I can get a commodity mix that has corn, gluten, and soy hulls in it. Well, we need to be feeding 3.5 pounds of that to her a day. And it's just, this is rule of thumb. If our cows are 1,400 pounds, we're going to have to back up and do some calculations. But this is just a shotgun look at our sample. And then we drop down here to a growing animal, typically kind of 850 poundish range replacement heifer is what this is calculated for. And we can see that we're providing her enough protein, but we're a little short on TDN. So we know that we may need to throw them some corn or something like that. But that is just very basic. If I don't have a working relationship with you in the past on something more in depth, or you don't ask for something more in depth, this is what you will get initially. And these are typically a good conversation starter for me, and people usually come back and say, hey, I want to do something a little deeper, and then we'll go from there. But this kind of primes the pump on. And then I have some guys that go, hey, I just want that thing printed on the back and I'm good. So it's what fits your situation here, but you will at least get some information back for your sample and know how to use it. Going in a little deeper, this is a total mixed ration that I have produced for a producer who is in the business of selling silage for feed in my county. And they started out with the basic printout on the back and 2 or 3 of those. And they called and said, hey, can we screw this down a little tighter? And I said, absolutely. So we did that. And now they're basically offering the people that are buying feed from them, say, if you'll tell us what protein and TDN requirements you're trying to hit and what commodities you have on hand, we will give you a feed ration. Then they shoot me an email and I send it back out to them. And this is one that I did right before Christmas for them. They had sold about 30 tons of silage to a guy, and these were what his requirements were wanting to be, and this is what he had on hand. And so we developed them a ration for that. And this is giving them a value to their business that is not even costing them anything. It's a value that they can send to their customer, and it is not costing them anything on their bottom line to their business. It's just a service we're providing for them. And then this is another sample that the guy had some hay, and he's wanting to produce a feed that matched that hay just almost perfectly. So that's what we did. And then this in turn has turned into a feed that he is producing and selling through his local business also. But this started out as a hay sample that we were just trying to get him the best feeds of commodities. He has a commodity barn on site, and this is what he had on hand. And so we developed a feed to go along with that hay for that year. And now it's turned into something that he sells. He also sells, so that we can get as deep as you want to with a hay sample and a forage sample, or we can just scratch the surface with the little printout on the back. Either way, it's totally up to you. But we do want to give you information for that sample as you get it back, because just a piece of paper with protein and TDN on the front of it really doesn't tell us a whole lot. And that's all I have. I hope that's a little clearer than mud, but if you have any questions, just let me know and we'll try to get them answered.
Well done, Casey. We appreciate you being here with us this evening, sharing that with us.
I appreciate you having me.